There are schools where silence does not signify peace, but fear and quiet resignation. And Summit Ridge High used to be one of those places, until an ordinary girl named Ava Monroe made the choice to no longer stay silent. In a place where whispered words could drown even the strongest sense of self-worth, Ava stood up to the one person every student feared, and in doing so, forced everyone to reflect on who they truly were. This is not a story about revenge. It is a story about quiet courage, about someone who chose to rise, and in that moment, changed everything. There are small towns that carry an odd kind of gentleness, quiet streets, rows of trees that seem to never shed a leaf out of place, and people who appear kind enough. But behind that silence lie unspoken rules, not written down, yet everyone understands them. And if you're a stranger, you'll feel it not through words, but from the very first glance. Not the kind of glance you can brush off, not simple curiosity, but the kind that tells you clearly, you don't belong here. Ava Monroe felt that the very first week she set foot in Crescent Hill, Idaho. 16 years old, hair tied neatly back, worn sneakers, a single-strap backpack, and eyes that always observed quietly. Ava was no stranger to strange towns. Her father's job, Noah Monroe, the newly appointed police chief, had them moving no less than 6 times in the last 3 years. For Ava, being the new girl in class in school on the block was nothing new. She had learned to keep silent, to quickly read the silent maps of social dynamics, who held power, who to steer clear of, who could be trusted. And at Crescent Hill High, that map revealed itself more clearly than ever. Bryce Langford, the star quarterback, only son of the richest family in town, was the name whispered most often. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to show off. The hallways simply parted when Bryce walked through. Ava had caught murmurs from her classmates. Best not mess with him. Around here, he is the law. Her father once said, kids like that exist in every school. They think they own the whole town. Ava simply nodded like she always did. She wasn't looking to draw attention, wasn't looking to make friends, definitely not looking for conflict. But that only lasted 2 days. By the 3rd day, everything began to shift, all because of a single look. Bryce stood at the end of the hallway, hands in the pockets of his varsity jacket, his eyes sweeping over the students before stopping on Ava. It wasn't a pleasant look, not friendly, not accidental. It was the look of someone who had decided, you're next. It started with whispers behind her back whenever she passed. Then came the giggles from his group of friends, just loud enough for Ava to hear, but subtle enough that adults would brush it off as harmless teenage banter. Soon after came the more direct remarks, mocking Ava's voice, the way she walked, the way she tied her hair. Ava gritted her teeth and endured. She was used to this kind of bullying. Silence was the best way not to get pulled into the spiral. But what Ava didn't yet know was that some people couldn't stand being ignored, and Bryce Langford was one of them. That Friday afternoon, during literature class, Mr. Holloway was lecturing about The Great Gatsby while Ava kept her head down, scribbling notes. She didn't want to be called on, didn't want attention. But then a voice cut through her focus. Hey, new girl. Ava didn't respond. I'm talking to you, Monroe. His voice was low but arrogant. Ava still didn't look up. Bryce leaned back in his chair, arms resting on the desk behind, voice laced with mockery. I just find it funny, you know. Some people walk into places they clearly don't belong, thinking they can just blend in. Laughter trickled from the rows behind. Ava clutched her pen tightly, her hand trembling slightly, but she said nothing. She'd been through this before. Say nothing, and it would pass quicker. But Bryce wasn't satisfied with silence. Hey, Monroe, you deaf or just got too much hair blocking your ears? Before Ava could respond, Mr. Holloway's voice rang out, sharp and irritated. Bryce, is there something you'd like to share with the entire class? Bryce smirked, sat up straight. No, sir, just welcoming the new student. The teacher shot him a look and continued the lesson. Ava exhaled softly. She hoped that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. A folded piece of paper landed quietly on her desk. Ava glanced around, then opened it, sloppy handwriting dripping with malice. You should go back to wherever you came from. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry, didn't react. She folded the note, slipped it into her bag, showed no emotion, gave Bryce nothing of what he wanted. But what Bryce didn't know was that Ava was not someone who could be erased so easily. And what he also didn't know was that Ava Monroe's father was not a man anyone in this town should ever underestimate. And soon, Bryce would learn that. Very soon. There are things you think you've grown used to, things you believe will pass if you just stay quiet, pretend not to notice. But at some point, when it happens often enough, when silence no longer protects you, but instead becomes the excuse others use to cross the line, everything changes, even in the kindest of people. Friday, lunchtime. The chaotic sounds of trays clattering, laughter, and bits of scattered conversation echoed through the cafeteria, as always. Ava sat alone in the far corner, just like every other day, earbuds in, eyes looking out the window, though no music played. It was simply her way to make the world a little less loud. She told herself, just a few more weeks, and it'll all get better. Just a bit more patience. Until that familiar sensation sent a chill down her back. Someone was standing close. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The overpowering cologne, the shuffle of athletic shoes, and the air suddenly thickening like a dark cloud had crept across the ceiling. Eating alone again? Bryce's voice floated in, soft, as though he were genuinely concerned, but the smirk in his eyes betrayed the delight he took in the moment. Ava didn't respond. She slid one earbud out but didn't look up. Figures, he continued, glancing back at the group of friends behind him. Who'd want to sit with someone like her anyway? Kyle laughed. Liam nodded. She's into that loner vibe, living in her own little world. Bryce shrugged, feigning sympathy. Or maybe, this just isn't the place for you, huh? Ava gripped the edge of the plastic tray beneath the table, her fingers clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. But still, she said nothing, still kept the same calm face. And perhaps it was that very silence that frustrated Bryce more than any retort could. Because he couldn't control her reaction. Because he couldn't win. And that's why he acted. In the blink of an eye, Ava saw Bryce's arm swing and crash. The tray in front of her went flying, slamming into the floor and breaking apart into a mess. Sauce, mashed potatoes, a milk carton spilling like a pool of cold ice. The sound of the tray hitting the floor rang sharp, freezing the entire cafeteria for a moment. All eyes turned toward her. Then came the giggles, sprouting from a few corners. Ava lowered her head. Her white sneakers were now soaked in a lunch no one wanted to eat. She took a deep breath, quietly pushed her chair back. No tears, no words. She simply reached for some napkins to wipe her hands, then stood up, intending to walk away. But Bryce wasn't done with his little performance. Where are you going? He stepped in front of her, his voice dropping a pitch, loud enough for the room to hear. We're not done talking, are we? Ava looked up. For the first time, her eyes met Bryce's, calm, steady, and so unfazed it made him falter. Move. Not loud, not harsh, but firm. And for the first time, a crack appeared in Bryce's confident smirk. He tilted his head, mocking, What? I said, move. Laughter erupted from Liam's table, as if Ava had just told a joke no one could believe. Bryce stepped forward, leaned in closer, voice darker. Don't like jokes? So what are you gonna do? Ava felt her chest tighten. Her heart pounded so fast it felt like it would burst out of her ribs. But before she could speak or act, another voice rang out, sharp and cold, like a siren in the dead of night. What's going on here? The entire cafeteria froze. Bryce stepped back. Assistant Principal Reese had appeared behind them, her eyes scanning the scene, settling on the mess at Ava's feet, then fixing on Bryce. Was this an accident? Bryce raised a hand, putting on his most innocent smile. Yes, ma'am. I just slipped, that's all. Ms. Reese turned to Ava. Is that true? Ava bit her lip. Part of her wanted to spill everything, wanted to scream that she was tired of swallowing it all. But past experience reminded her, no one believes the new girl. No one takes the side of a cop's daughter with no friends, no allies. She gave a small nod. Yes, it was just an accident. Ms. Reese sighed, shook her head. Good. You two clean this up. It ends here. Bryce raised an eyebrow like he'd just won. He turned to walk away, tossing over his shoulder. See you Monday, Monroe. Ava stood there, in the middle of a puddle of cold milk, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade. She didn't understand why the lie hurt more than the humiliation. Maybe it was because it reinforced the silence people like Bryce counted on. Maybe because it betrayed what her father had always taught her. Never let anyone make you feel small. But this time, she wasn't going to let it end that way. That evening, the small house on the edge of Summit Ridge was bathed in a warm yellow glow and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Ava walked in with slow steps, each one still carrying traces of dried milk stuck to the soles of her shoes. She set her backpack on the floor, bent down to remove her shoes, a habitual motion, though her eyes remained distant and pensive. The kitchen door was open, and a familiar, deep voice called out, "Ava, is that you?" She replied softly, "Yes." Short. She didn't want to lie, but didn't have the energy to tell the whole story either. Ava Monroe was standing by the kitchen counter, holding a dark brown ceramic mug with the word Chief written on it. His police uniform still had sharp creases, his gun rested on the rack, and his nameplate gleamed under the light. He looked at his daughter, silent for just a second, but Ava immediately recognized that look, the gaze of a man who had spent his life observing people, reading them without a single word. He set the mug down. "Something happened at school again, didn't it?" Ava pulled out a chair and sat at the kitchen table. She looked up, about to say, "It's fine," but her throat tightened. She saw again the cruel words from Bryce, the tray crashing to the floor, the staring eyes of strangers, and the burning shame that she hadn't spoken up for herself. She nodded. Noah said nothing. He walked over, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down, hands clasped on the table, eyes fixed on his daughter. He didn't press. He just waited, the way he always had since Ava was little, not rushing, not forcing, but never ignoring. "Bryce Hawkins," she said quietly. "He knocked my lunch tray over, in front of the whole cafeteria, on purpose." Noah frowned. "What about the school, Ms. Reese?" "She was there, asked if it was an accident. I said yes." He leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression darkening. "Why?" Ava lowered her gaze. "Because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I'm new. They've been here for years. Their families are well known. I'm just a cop's daughter. It's like I'm just being too sensitive." Silence filled the kitchen for several seconds. Only the steady ticking of the clock reminded them that time was moving on, even when hearts were stuck in unsaid words. Noah gently placed his hand on the table, near hers. "Ava, I didn't raise you to be strong, so you'd learn to endure in silence. I raised you so you'd know that if you don't speak up, people will think they're allowed to do what they want." She looked up, hesitation in her eyes. "But if I speak up, it'll only get worse. I don't want you getting into trouble because of me." He smiled, a sad, weary smile. "Sweetheart, I can handle trouble. What I can't handle is watching you live in fear. Kindness doesn't mean letting people walk all over you." Ava felt a weight pressing on her chest, a blend of sorrow, helplessness, and something slowly unraveling as she listened to those words. "I just feel tired. I don't want to spend my whole life being the outsider everywhere I go." Noah stood, walked behind her, and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You're not the outsider. They are, the ones who haven't figured that out yet, but they will." Ava turned to look at him. "What are you going to do?" He simply said, his voice steady and quiet like a promise. "Tomorrow you go to school like usual. Let me handle the rest." She looked at him, her father, calm and unshaken, eyes unafraid of anyone, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel small anymore. Not because someone would speak up for her, but because she knew she had something to lean on, and sometimes that alone is enough to help you stand tall in the middle of a storm. Monday morning. The start of the week at Summit Ridge High seemed to unfold as usual, students bustling into the building, the school bell ringing loudly, sneakers sliding across tiled hallways. But for Ava Monroe, every step she took carried a strange sensation. Not quite fear, not hope either. It was a feeling, an intuition, that today would not be like any other day before it. As she opened her locker, a nearby whisper caught her attention. "Hey, did you hear? The police chief is in the main office. It's about what happened Friday." Ava froze. Her heart began to race, not from worry, but from a swell of bewilderment. Her father had really come. He had told her he'd take care of it, and just as promised, he had acted. The murmurs rippled through clusters of students. "He's in there with the principal," someone said, and Bryce Hawkins' parents showed up too. Ava took a deep breath. Every step toward her classroom now seemed magnetically pulled toward the main office, the place where the confrontation was unfolding, where the parts of her past that had been ignored were now being spoken aloud by a voice more powerful than hers. The office door swung open just as Ava was walking by. Principal Lowell's voice rang out, low and composed but strained. "Chief Monroe, I honestly didn't think this matter warranted police involvement." Ava stopped. Through the narrow gap in the open door, she could see her father, wearing his light-colored police uniform, the Monroe nameplate glinting under the fluorescent light, standing tall, eyes calm but commanding. Beside him was Assistant Principal Reese, her face tense, carefully avoiding his gaze. Opposite them sat a sharply dressed couple, Mr. and Mrs. Hawkins, with arms crossed and unmistakable irritation written on their faces. And Bryce stood leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, no longer wearing that smug grin, only a quiet unease. "My daughter was publicly humiliated in front of hundreds of students," Noah said, his voice low but without needing force. "It was a deliberate act, and worse, no one on your staff stepped in to defend her. You call that an accident, a minor issue. I call it a failure." Mr. Hawkins gave a dismissive shrug, his voice laced with condescension. "They're teenagers. A bit of drama, some pushing around. It's normal." Noah turned, eyes sharp as blades. "When pushing around becomes a series of intentional, repeated acts of bullying, silently sanctioned by the environment meant to protect children, that is not normal. That is a culture of silence. And as of today, it ends." A heavy silence filled the room. Bryce looked down at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. Principal Lowell cleared his throat and flipped through his notepad as if searching for something to say. But Noah didn't wait. He turned to the principal and spoke each word with clarity. "I want a written report of the incident. Names of everyone involved, clearly stated. I want Bryce's behavior documented in the school's internal record. And I want the school to host a meeting with parents, students, and faculty to talk openly about conduct, about mutual respect, and about the consequences of bullying." Ms. Reese lifted her head, her voice softer than usual. "I agree. I was wrong to let Ava face this on her own." For the first time during the entire conversation, Noah's gaze softened. "Thank you. Acknowledgement is the first step." Mr. Hawkins shot to his feet, pointing at Ava, now standing at the doorway, unable to hide her astonishment. "This is how you spoil children, letting them think that just because their dad's a cop, they can get anything they want." Noah looked him square in the eye. "Number. I'm teaching my daughter that no one, not those with power, wealth, or reputation, has the right to humiliate others and get away with it." Bryce Hawkins said nothing. He didn't look at anyone. He simply bowed his head, and for the first time, Ava saw it. There was no confidence left in that posture, no arrogance. Only someone stripped of a mask painted with privilege and indulgence. As Noah left the office, he didn't say a word to Ava. He simply placed a hand gently on her shoulder and walked on. But that simple touch spoke volumes. It was a reminder. You are not alone. And for the first time, Ava truly believed it. That day's lunch hour was unlike any other. The loud laughter from Bryce's group in their usual corner was gone, as were the knowing glances that used to follow Ava when she entered the cafeteria. Instead, there was a strange quietness, as if every sound was holding its breath, waiting for something. Ava Monroe walked in, lunch tray in hand, her gaze steady and unflinching. She could feel the eyes on her, not with pity, not with mockery, but with curiosity, with caution, with a kind of respect she had never received since arriving in this town. Whispers trailed beside her as she passed. "I heard her dad went straight to the principal's office and called him out. Bryce got summoned too. His parents had to come. This time, he's not getting away with it." Ava paid no attention. She walked straight to the back of the room, to the table that today seemed emptier than usual. No one crowded around Bryce Hawkins anymore. No one jostled or joked. He was sitting alone, spinning a soda can between his hands, staring blankly into space. Ava hadn't planned to stop, but just as she walked past him, he spoke, quietly, but loud enough for her to hear. "So what now? Can't fight your own battles, so you got Daddy to step in?" Ava stopped. Her tray trembled slightly in her grip, but her expression remained calm. She turned around, slowly set the tray down on the table. The cafeteria held its breath. "You know what disappointed me the most?" she asked, her voice unnervingly calm. Bryce looked up, raising an eyebrow. "It wasn't your childish behavior. It wasn't you throwing food at me. It was the fact that you thought I was so weak I needed my dad to protect me." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You were wrong." Bryce curled his lip, trying to muster a condescending smile. "Aren't you proving the opposite right now?" Ava gave a soft laugh, sharp and clean like a knife's edge. "If I had stood up and punched you in the face that day, I'd probably be suspended, labeled a troublemaker, called aggressive. But when someone like you can publicly humiliate others for weeks and no one says a word, then it's no longer just my problem, it's the school's problem." Bryce faltered. Ava leaned slightly forward, speaking clearly so he could hear every word. "You didn't lose because my father is a cop. You lost because you thought no one would dare challenge you. And today, everyone saw that no one stands above accountability." A small laugh rose from a nearby table, then a nod, then a look of quiet support. Slowly, the energy in the cafeteria began to shift. No applause, no chants. But the atmosphere said everything. The invisible power Bryce once held was gone. He lowered his head and said nothing more. Ava picked up her tray and returned to her usual spot. But this time, she wasn't sitting alone. A girl from math class approached, a little shy. "Is this seat taken?" Ava nodded. Another student from the school paper came over, then a boy who usually sat in the back of biology class. No one said much, but the way they quietly sat beside her meant more than any apology ever could. For the first time since she'd moved here, Ava didn't feel alone. And as she looked around the room, she finally understood what her father always said. Real power doesn't lie in making others fear you. It lies in the respect people willingly give you when you dare to speak what's right. That afternoon, when the dismissal bell rang, Ava walked slowly through the hallway bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The rows of muted gray lockers stood silently, as if even they were looking at her with a different gaze. No more side glances. No more whispered snickers behind her back. Nothing had magically changed, but something had begun to shift. And sometimes, it only takes a gentle nudge to the old momentum for everything to start moving in a new direction. She stood in front of her locker for a long moment, her hand brushing against a small scratch on the metal door, a scratch someone had left last week, along with a mocking note. It was still there now, but older, more out of place among the quiet changes beginning to take root. She didn't wipe it away. There was no need. It was part of the story, a marker that reminded her every beginning comes with a cost. And Ava had paid for it, with silence, with swallowed tears, with lonely days that pierced her heart. The car door opened as she reached the parking lot. Her father, James Monroe, the man with the sharp eyes of a police officer and the warm heart of a father, was waiting behind the wheel, his arm resting on the window, eyes gentle as he looked at his daughter. "How was it?" he asked, his voice as calm and steady as always. Ava slid into the seat, fastened her seatbelt, and smiled. Not a wide or flashy smile, but one that was deeply, unmistakably real. "Better than yesterday," she said. James nodded, started the car, and drove out of the school lot. A moment passed before he spoke again, slowly, as if weighing each word. "You know, I thought a lot about whether I did the right thing by showing up that day. But then I realized I didn't step in because I thought you were weak. I did it because I knew you were strong enough to keep going, once that door was opened." Ava looked out the window, watching the sunset stretch across the familiar roads that no longer felt like strangers. "I think," Strength doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it's continuing on when no one stands with you, but sometimes it's accepting a hand held out to you and not feeling like you failed because of it. James said nothing more. He just nodded, his eyes still on the road ahead, but the corners of his lips lifted slightly, the smile of a father who had just seen his child grow a little more. That night, in her bedroom, Ava sat at her desk, the lamp casting a warm glow over a notebook left half-filled. She wrote a few lines, then paused. Her fingers reached for the corner of a photograph on her desk, an old photo of her and her mother, back when they lived in another state, when everything had begun, when every dream still felt whole. Her mother had always said, "You don't need to be loud to be heard. You just have to say what's right, by living it." And today, Ava had lived that truth. Outside her window, the night sky over Summit Ridge was still and quiet. But within her, something had begun to stir. Not an ending, but a beginning. A new chapter, where she was no longer just the new girl, the cop's daughter, or the bullied one. She was Ava Monroe, the girl who dared to face it, dared to rise, and dared to believe that kindness could, in fact, bring about change. And dear reader, if you've ever been Ava, if you've ever felt small in a world too big, remember this. As long as you don't shrink yourself, no one else can do it for you. You don't need to be accepted to have value. You have value, simply because you are you. The next day, school began just like any other, or at least it appeared to on the surface. The bell rang as usual. Students streamed into classrooms, hallways filled with the sound of footsteps and rushed greetings. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Gone was the heavy, suffocating energy from the week before. Gone were the muffled giggles when Ava Monroe passed by. Gone were the sneering, judgmental looks. People still looked at her, but this time, with acknowledgement. Ava wasn't expecting apologies. She wasn't waiting for belated comfort. The only thing she wanted was quiet, to not be harmed, to not be dismissed. And today, she got that. As she walked into English class, the place where it had all started, she saw that her desk had been cleaned. No mocking notes, no ink stains. Just an empty desk waiting to welcome her back. Her teacher, Mr. Hargrove, looked up, his gaze resting on Ava a beat longer than usual. "Good morning, Ava," he said gently. "We're discussing the theme of silence in literature. Would you like to share your thoughts?" The entire class turned to her. Once, those eyes would have made her shrink back, but today, she took a deep breath and nodded. "Silence," she said slowly, "isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's a choice, a way to survive when you don't have the right to speak. But what's truly frightening isn't the silence itself. It's when people witness something wrong and also choose to stay silent." The classroom went still. No laughter, no whispers. They were just listening. "I used to be silent. I was scared. I thought that if I didn't say anything, it would all go away. But it didn't. It just made people think they could keep going. And then I realized, if I don't speak up, if I don't stand up, no one's going to do it for me." Ava paused. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. "But now I've spoken, and I'm not afraid anymore." The class remained quiet, but this time it was a silence filled with respect, with understanding. A few students bowed their heads, others exchanged glances, as if silently reminding themselves they had just witnessed something important. As Ava sat down, she noticed Riley, a quiet girl who sat 3 desks away, nod at her gently. Just a small nod, without words, but Ava understood. It wasn't pity, it was solidarity. It was Riley's way of saying, "I've been there too." During recess, Ava sat alone in the corner of the schoolyard, beneath the tree she always returned to during break. But today, she wasn't alone for long. A group of classmates approached. They didn't say much. They didn't pretend to be close. They simply sat beside her, dropped their backpacks onto the grass, and together, they looked out over the courtyard. A boy named Jordan said, "If that had been me, I don't think I would have done anything. But today, you made me think twice. Thanks, Ava." She smiled, a real smile, without tension, without walls. "I just did what I needed to do," she said softly. That day didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or a climactic event. It was just an ordinary day, one in which silence had finally spoken, One where a girl who had once been pushed into the shadows now sat in the sunlight with a few new friends, with recognition, not loud, not showy, but real enough that, for the first time, Ava felt that she truly belonged. From the perspective of an educational expert, Ava Monroe's story is not merely a personal journey of overcoming school bullying. It stands as a powerful testament to the strength of courage, the unwavering support of family, and the indispensable role of the educational environment in safeguarding human dignity. When schools remain silent, bullying finds its voice. But when a student dares to step out of that silence, the entire system is compelled to re-examine itself. Ava did not need to retaliate in order to win. She simply stood up, spoke the truth, and refused to accept injustice, and that alone was enough to shift the balance of power. Education is not just about imparting knowledge. It is about creating a safe space where students understand this truth. Their worth is not defined by where they come from, but by how they choose to face the world.